The classroom was unlike anything found on Earth. It stretched wide and tall, with seats arranged in a circle that went up like a stadium. The walls glowed with a soft blue light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Students from dozens of different worlds sat in those seats, and each one looked completely different from the others. There were beings with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Others had fur that changed colors based on their moods. Some had 4 arms, others had 6 eyes, and a few didn't seem to have solid bodies at all. They floated in special containers filled with glowing liquid. This was the Galactic Academy, where young beings from across the universe came to learn about each other. Professor Velthera stood at the center of the room. She was tall and thin, with purple skin that looked almost transparent. Through it, you could see veins that pulsed with golden light. Her species, the Kethrans, were known across the galaxy as great teachers. She had no mouth, but when she spoke, her voice appeared directly in everyone's mind. Today, her voice echoed in their thoughts. We continue our study of cultural danger assessment. Each of you will demonstrate a traditional game from your homeworld that your species considers dangerous. This will help us understand how different cultures process risk and fear. The students shifted in their seats. Some looked excited, others nervous. They had known this assignment was coming for weeks. A student named Rex stood up first. He was short and covered in thick, rocky armor. His people came from a planet with extreme gravity. I will show Kryn razor dancing, he announced. His voice sounded like stones grinding together. He pulled out what looked like very sharp metal wings and attached them to his arms. Then he began to spin. The wings cut through the air with a whistling sound. He spun faster and faster, and the wings came so close to his body that everyone thought he would cut himself. But he stopped at exactly the right moment, his thick armor barely scratched. The class made various sounds of approval. Professor Velthara's golden veins pulsed brighter, which meant she was pleased. Next came Scylla, a being made of what looked like flowing water held together by a thin membrane. My people play Tholian gravity diving, she said, her voice like bubbles popping. She explained how her species would dive into the gravity wells of black holes, seeing how close they could get before their bodies started to stretch apart. Of course, she couldn't demonstrate that here, so she showed a recording instead. The class watched as dozens of Tholians dove toward a swirling darkness in space, their bodies stretching like rubber before they pulled away at the last possible second. More students went. There was a demonstration of Vexian mind burning, where telepathic beings would push their mental powers until their thoughts started to burn like fire. There was Haxian poison tasting, where a species immune to most toxins would sample deadly substances to prove their strength. Each game showed danger, but each one also showed skill. These were games where practice made you better, where knowledge kept you safe. Then Professor Velthera's attention turned to the human section of the classroom. There were 4 humans in this class, which was unusual. Humans were new to the galactic community. Their planet, Earth, had only made contact with alien life 5 years ago. These 4 were part of the first real exchange program. Jawan, Professor Velthera said, would you like to present your species' dangerous game? Jawan stood up slowly. He was young, maybe 20 Earth years old, with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore the simple gray uniform that all Academy students wore. He looked at his fellow humans, Hyunwoo, Minji, and Doyen, and something passed between them. A look of understanding. Yes, Professor, Jawan said. His voice was quiet but clear. I would like to show a human game, but I will need volunteers. The alien students looked at each other with confusion. Most of their demonstrations had been solo performances. What kind of volunteers? Professor Velthara asked. People willing to participate, Jawan said. The game doesn't work if you only watch. Hyunwoo stood up immediately. He was taller than Jawan, with broader shoulders and an easy smile. I'll help, he said. Minji stood next. She was small and thin, with sharp, intelligent eyes. She held up a recording device. I'll document it, she said. Do-Yun was the last to stand. He was the oldest of the 4 humans, with gray already showing in his hair even though he wasn't yet 30. Someone should explain the context, he said. I'll do that. An alien student named Kickstar also raised one of his 4 arms. He looked like a giant insect, with compound eyes that reflected light in rainbow patterns. I am curious about human culture, he clicked. May I observe closely? Of course, Jawan said. He walked down to the center of the circular room. The others followed him. From his bag, Jawan pulled out a small wooden box. The box looked very old, with scratches and worn edges. He opened it carefully. Inside, resting on red fabric, was a strange device. It was made of metal that had lost its shine long ago. The shape was unusual, a handle with a cylinder attached and a long tube pointing forward. "This," Jaewon said, holding it up, "is called a revolver. It's a weapon from Earth, a gun. It fires small pieces of metal at very high speed. If one hits you in the right place, you die." The classroom became very quiet. Weapons were known to all species, but there was something about the casual way Jaewon held this one that made everyone uncomfortable. Jaewon reached into the box again and pulled out 6 small brass cylinders. "These are bullets," he said. "Each one can kill a human instantly if fired at the head or heart." He opened the cylinder of the revolver. Inside were 6 empty chambers like a wheel with 6 holes. The alien students leaned forward to see better, though many of them looked afraid. "The game," Jaewon continued, "is called Russian Roulette. The rules are very simple." He took one bullet and slid it into one of the 6 chambers. Then he spun the cylinder. It made a clicking sound as it turned. When it stopped, no one could tell which chamber held the bullet. "You put the gun to your head," Jaewon said, and he did exactly that. He pressed the barrel of the revolver against his temple. His hand was completely steady. "And you pull the trigger. Stop." Professor Velthera's mental voice was so loud that several students grabbed their heads. "You cannot. The game has a 1 in 6 chance of death," Jaewon said calmly, the gun still pressed to his head. 5 chambers are empty. 1 has the bullet. You don't know which one will line up when you pull the trigger. No skill can help you. No practice makes you better. It's pure chance. Life or death decided by luck alone." The aliens stared in absolute horror. This wasn't a game. This was insanity. "This," Jaewon said, his finger moving to the trigger, "is humanity's answer to your question about dangerous games." The room held its breath. Hyunwoo stood ready, his face serious but not afraid. Minji's recording device captured everything. Doyeon watched the alien students, seeing their reactions, and Kickstar's compound eyes were fixed on Jaewon's face, trying to understand what kind of species would invent something like this. Jaewon's finger tightened on the trigger. The click echoed through the silent classroom. The click of the empty chamber seemed to last forever. Jaewon stood there with the gun still pressed against his head, completely calm. He was still alive. The cylinder had turned to an empty chamber. 5 more chances remained, but one of them held death. Several alien students made sounds of distress. A Belvonian, whose species communicated through color changes, flashed bright red, the color of extreme fear. 2 Grellian students, who looked like floating jellyfish, actually fainted and drifted down to the floor of their containment tanks. Professor Velthera's golden veins pulsed rapidly, almost frantically. "Jaewon, put that weapon down immediately. This is not acceptable. This is not a game, this is attempted suicide." But Jaewon slowly lowered the gun and looked at her calmly. "With respect, Professor, this is exactly what you asked for. You wanted to see a dangerous game from our culture. This is one of them. Dangerous games have rules." Velthara's mental voice shook with emotion. "They have safety measures. They test skill or courage or endurance. What you just did tested nothing but random chance." "Exactly," Jaewon said quietly. He held up the revolver for everyone to see. "This game has no skill. Practice doesn't help. Being strong or smart or fast means nothing. The only thing that matters is luck. And humans play it anyway." Hyunwoo stepped forward. "May I go next?" he asked. The classroom erupted in noise. Aliens shouted, clicked, buzzed, and flashed colors all at once. Professor Velthara's mental voice cut through it all like a knife. "Absolutely not. One demonstration of insanity is enough. But it's not insanity," Doyeon said, speaking for the first time. His older, calm voice made some of the aliens quiet down to listen. "That's what you don't understand. Let me explain what this game means to humans." Professor Velthera's veins pulsed, but she nodded. "Explain quickly before I report this entire class to the Academy Council." Doyeon walked to the center where Jaewon stood. He looked at all the alien faces watching them. "Every species here showed us a dangerous game today. Freck showed razor dancing. With practice, you get better at razor dancing. You learn exactly how fast to spin, exactly when to stop. The danger is real, but it's controlled. You master it." He gestured to where Scylla floated in her tank.
"Scylla's people dive toward black holes."
"Terrifying, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But they study gravity, they calculate trajectories, they learn the limits of their bodies. Knowledge makes them safer. Experience makes them better." Doyeon picked up the revolver from where Jaewon had set it down. Many aliens flinched. This weapon doesn't care about your knowledge. It doesn't care if you're brave or smart or experienced. When you spin this cylinder, you give up control completely. You face pure random chance. And that, more than anything else, is what terrifies you about humans. Kickstar, the insect-like student, clicked his mandibles together rapidly, his species' way of asking for permission to speak. I have calculated the probability, he said. Each pull of the trigger has a 1 in 6 chance of death. After J1's turn, the next person has a 1 in 5 chance, assuming the cylinder isn't spun again. This is not acceptable risk. This is statistical suicide. You're right, Hyunwoo said, and he took the gun from Doyen's hand. Before anyone could stop him, he spun the cylinder again. The clicking sound made everyone freeze. Every time we spin, it's 1 in 6 again. Fair odds for everyone. Fair, a student named Plexer shouted. She had tentacles instead of arms, and her skin was bright orange with stress. There is nothing fair about a 16% chance of death. Every rational species learns to avoid random danger. And that's the difference, Minji said, still recording everything. Her voice was soft, but everyone could hear her in the shocked silence. You said rational species. You think humans aren't rational because we invented this game. She walked closer to the group of aliens. But we are rational. We know the odds. We know it's dangerous. We understand that no skill can save us. And some humans still choose to play. Not because we're stupid, but because sometimes humans need to feel something more than safety. Professor Velthera's veins had slowed their pulsing. She was listening now, trying to understand. Explain what you mean, she said. Hyunwoo still held the gun, though he hadn't raised it yet. On Earth, humans were the dominant species for thousands of years before we reached space. We had no natural predators. We conquered every environment. We built cities where nothing could hunt us. We created medicine that stopped most diseases. We made life safe. He looked down at the revolver in his hand. But humans didn't evolve to be safe. We evolved to struggle and fight and survive against impossible odds. When life became too safe, some humans felt empty. They felt numb. They needed to remember what it felt like to be alive, and the easiest way to feel alive is to face death. Doyen nodded. Russian roulette came from Russia, a region on Earth probably in the early 20th century. It was played by soldiers, by people who had seen too much death and too much suffering. They played because they had stopped caring if they lived or died. It was a game born from despair. Then why are you presenting it as cultural practice? Professor Velthara asked. Why show us something born from mental illness? Because it tells you something important about humans, Jaewon answered. It tells you that we have a different relationship with death than you do. We don't just try to avoid it. Sometimes we challenge it. We look at it directly and we say, not today. And then we take risks that would paralyze other species. Minji lowered her recording device. Think about your own species games. All of them show mastery over danger. You prove you're better than the threat, but Russian roulette doesn't let you be better than death. It makes death your equal. You face it on completely even terms, and that's what makes it so terrifying. It's honest. Kickstar's compound eyes reflected the lights in strange patterns as he processed this information. I am trying to understand. You are saying that humans deliberately created a game with no possibility of mastery? A game where experience provides no advantage? Yes, all 4 humans said at the same time. But why would evolution create a species that seeks random death? Kickstar asked. It didn't, Doyen said. Evolution created a species that takes calculated risks. Humans who took risks found new territory, new food, new opportunities. Humans who played it too safe got left behind. Our ancestors climbed cliffs to find bird eggs even though they might fall. They hunted animals much bigger than themselves even though they might be killed. Every major advancement in human history came because someone was willing to risk death for a possible reward. He gestured at the revolver. Russian roulette is what happens when that risk-taking instinct goes wrong. When there's no reward, no benefit, just the risk itself. It's the dark side of the trait that made us successful. Hyunwoo raised the gun slowly. Many aliens looked away. He pressed it against his own temple, just as Jaewon had done. But here's what you really need to understand about humans, he said softly. Even knowing all of this, knowing it's irrational, knowing it serves no purpose, knowing the odds, I can still make myself pull this trigger. Not because I want to die, but because I can prove I'm not afraid to. His finger moved to the trigger. Professor Velthera didn't stop him this time. She watched, horrified but fascinated, as Hyunwoo's finger tightened. Click, empty chamber. Hyunwoo lowered the gun, and his hand was shaking now. 2 down, he said, his voice not quite as steady as before. 4 chambers left. One of them has the bullet. The classroom was absolutely silent. Every alien student stared at the humans with a mixture of terror and confused fascination. They were trying to understand a species that would willingly face random death just to prove they could. Minji raised her recording device again. "Should I go next?" she asked quietly. And in that moment, every alien in the room realized something that chilled them to their cores. The humans weren't just demonstrating a game. They were actually going to keep playing it. News of the demonstration spread through the Galactic Academy faster than light could travel through normal space. By the time the class ended, half the academy knew about it. By the next morning, the entire station was talking about nothing else. The humans had played Russian roulette. They had pointed a loaded gun at their own heads and pulled the trigger. Not once, but twice, and they had been ready to continue. The Academy Council met in emergency session. Security recordings of the classroom were reviewed dozens of times. Psychologists from 15 different species requested permission to study the human students. 3 ambassadors from peaceful species filed formal complaints, demanding the humans be sent home. 2 ambassadors from warrior species filed requests to meet the humans personally, but the humans themselves seemed completely calm about the whole thing. They attended their other classes normally. They ate in the cafeteria. They studied in the library. When other students stared at them or whispered as they passed, the humans just nodded politely and kept walking. On the 3rd day after the demonstration, Doyen was called to speak before a panel of alien psychologists. The meeting took place in a large room with 1 table and many chairs arranged in a semicircle. 12 different species sat in those chairs, all of them experts in mind and behavior. Doyun sat alone at the table, a glass of water in front of him. A Netherian psychologist named Kellic spoke first. Her species looked like walking plants, with skin that photosynthesized light into energy. "Doyen of Earth," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "We have reviewed the recording of your demonstration many times. We are trying to understand what we saw. Can you explain why your species would create such a game?" Doyen took a sip of water before answering. "Russian roulette wasn't created by our species as a whole," he said carefully. "It was created by a small group of humans in a specific time and place. Most humans never play it. Many humans think it's horrible. But it exists," said Vorhan, "a crystalline being whose thoughts appeared as colored light. And you chose to demonstrate it? Why not show us a safer human game?" "Because Professor Velthara asked for dangerous games," Doyen replied. "You wanted to understand how different species process risk. Russian roulette is perhaps the purest expression of risk that humans have ever created. It removes all other variables. No skill, no strength, no intelligence, just chance and courage." A 3rd psychologist named Trill Ara leaned forward. She was Orlasian, a species that looked almost human except for the 3rd eye in the center of her forehead. "But courage should have purpose," she said. "Courage should be used to achieve something worthwhile. What does Russian roulette achieve?" "Nothing," Doyen admitted. "That's exactly the point. It's risk for risk's sake. It's facing death with no reward except the knowledge that you faced it. That is insanity," Kellic said flatly. "Maybe," Doyen agreed. "Or maybe it's just human. Can I show you something?" He pulled out a data pad and placed it on the table. With a few touches, he projected a holographic display into the air above them. Images appeared one after another. "These are other human activities," Doyen explained. "Things humans do for entertainment or sport." The first image showed a human jumping from an aircraft. "This is called skydiving. Humans jump from flying vehicles at high altitude and fall toward the ground at terminal velocity. They open a parachute at the last possible moment." The psychologist watched in confusion as the display showed hundreds of humans doing the same activity. "What is the purpose?" Vorhan asked. "Fun," Doyen said. "Humans think it's enjoyable." The next image showed a human climbing a vertical rock face with no safety equipment. "This is free climbing. One slip means death. Humans do it because they find it satisfying." More images followed. Humans running in front of angry bulls. Humans diving into caves deep underwater where one wrong turn meant drowning in the dark. Humans skiing down mountains so steep that falling meant tumbling hundreds of meters. Humans surfing waves so large that being caught under one meant being smashed against rocks. These are recreational activities? Trilara asked in disbelief. Humans risk death for recreation? Not all humans, Doyen clarified. But enough that every human culture has developed multiple dangerous sports and activities. We even have a phrase for it, extreme sports. We named an entire category of activities based on how close to death they bring us. Kellix's leaves rustled with agitation. This is widespread in human culture. This seeking of danger? Very widespread, Doyen confirmed. He changed the display again. Now it showed historical images. These are from different periods of human history. Humans in gladiator arenas, fighting to the death for entertainment. Humans in jousting tournaments, charging at each other with lances while riding animals. Humans in duels shooting at each other with pistols to defend their honor. Honor? Vorhan's light pulsed with confusion. You would die for honor? Humans have died for many reasons, Doyen said quietly. Honor, glory, pride, curiosity, boredom, love, hate, religion, politics, and sometimes just to prove we could. Do you know what the most dangerous job on Earth has been throughout history? Explorer. Humans who traveled to places no one had been before, knowing they might never return, and humans volunteered for these expeditions in huge numbers. He showed them more images. Ancient human ships sailing into unknown oceans. Human astronauts sitting in primitive rockets. Human scientists experimenting with deadly diseases. Human test pilots flying experimental aircraft that failed more often than they succeeded. Look at this one, Doyen said, highlighting a particular image. It showed a primitive spacecraft from Earth's early space program. This was the Apollo program. Humans built rockets to go to our moon. The chance of death was calculated at around 30%. They went anyway, not because they had to, not because Earth was dying or because we were fleeing an enemy. We went to the moon because it was there. The psychologists were silent, processing this information. Trilara spoke finally, her third eye blinking slowly. Let me understand this correctly. Humans developed advanced civilization, conquered your planet, achieved safety and comfort, and then deliberately created new dangers because you were bored? In simple terms, yes, Doyen said. When humans don't have enough real danger in their lives, many of them seek it out artificially. We need it. Our brains and bodies evolved to deal with constant threats. When those threats disappear, something in us feels wrong, empty. So we create new challenges. This explains Russian roulette, Kellix said slowly. It was created in a time of great danger, war, but by soldiers who had become numb to normal danger. They needed something more intense to feel alive again. Exactly, Doyen agreed. It's an extreme example, but it follows the same pattern. Humans seek the edge of death because that's where we feel most alive. Vorhan's colors shifted to deep purple, which indicated deep thought in his species. We need to study this further. But I have one more question. When Jaewon pulled that trigger, when Hyunwoo pulled that trigger, were they afraid? Doyen thought about this carefully. Yes, he said finally. They were terrified. Both of them. I know because I know them well. But humans can be afraid and still act. Fear doesn't paralyze us the way it does some species. We can feel fear and push through it. We call it courage, but maybe it's just how human brains are wired. Or maybe it's a mental defect, Kellis suggested. Perhaps humans have a species-wide dysfunction that prevents proper fear response. Maybe, Doyen said again. But that defect, if that's what it is also why humans went from primitive hunters to a spacefaring species in just 10,000 years. Most species take 100,000 years or more. Humans moved fast because we took risks that rational species wouldn't take. The room fell silent again. The psychologists looked at each other, communicating in ways Doyen couldn't hear or see. Finally, Trilara spoke for all of them. We will need to observe your species much more carefully, she said. You may be the most dangerous intelligent species in the galaxy. Not because you're violent or aggressive, but because you don't have a normal survival instinct. You should all be dead, extinct long ago. But instead you're here, playing games with death as if it's nothing. We don't think it's nothing, Doyen corrected gently. We know death is real. We know it's final. Every human who has ever lived has had to face death, their own or someone they loved. We respect death. We fear death. But we refuse to let fear of death control us. And that, I think, is what really scares you about humans. He stood up, preparing to leave. We're not fearless. We're not stupid. We're not broken. We're just human. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all to species who have learned to let caution rule their lives. Because humans ask a question that you don't ask. We ask, what's the worst that could happen? And then, knowing the answer is death, we do it anyway. As Doyen left the room, the 12 psychologists sat in stunned silence. They had studied hundreds of species across the galaxy. They understood aggression, territoriality, survival instinct, and self-preservation. But humanity was something new, something that didn't fit their models. By the time Doyen reached the door, they were already composing their report to the Academy Council. The report would have one simple conclusion. Humanity was either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most insane. And to truly terrify, within a week, the entire Galactic Academy was divided. Not just the students or the faculty, but the ambassadors, the researchers, and even the maintenance workers had opinions about the humans and their terrifying game. Arguments broke out in cafeterias, in dormitories, and in research labs. The question on everyone's mind was simple but profound. Were humans too dangerous to be part of galactic civilization? The council chamber was packed for the first time in 50 years. Usually only a handful of species cared enough to attend council debates. But this time, representatives from 43 different worlds came to have their voices heard. The chamber was designed like an amphitheater, with seats rising up from a central floor where speakers could address the crowd. The walls were transparent, showing the stars beyond. Ambassador Krelix of the Vortian Alliance spoke first. His species looked like walking mantises, with multiple jointed limbs and large multifaceted eyes. He stood at the speaker's platform and his voice boomed through translation devices. The humans have proven themselves to be reckless and unstable. They demonstrated a game where death is random and meaningless. What happens when we trust them with important responsibilities? What happens when a human captain commands a ship full of innocent lives? Will they play Russian roulette with our safety too? Many species showed agreement. Colors flashed, appendages waved, and various sounds of approval echoed through the chamber. But then Ambassador Yelsha of the Pelthoran Federation stood. Her species was reptilian, with silver scales and bright yellow eyes. I disagree, she said firmly. The humans demonstrated exactly what they were asked to demonstrate, a dangerous game from their culture. They were honest about what it was and what it meant. That takes courage, not recklessness. Courage? Krelix challenged. Or insanity? There's a thin line between the two. Perhaps, Yelsha agreed. But consider this. How many species here were brave enough to leave their home systems when the journey might fail? How many of you risked your lives to join the galactic community? Humans show us that sometimes progress requires accepting risk. A third ambassador stood. This was Telmora of the Viscan Collective, a species that looked like floating clouds of luminous gas held together by electromagnetic fields. I propose a middle path. Telmora's voice resonated through the chamber. We do not exile humanity, but neither do we fully embrace them. We study them. We learn from their unusual psychology. We determine if they can be safely integrated. More debate followed. For hours, ambassadors argued back and forth. Some wanted humans banned from the academy. Others wanted them welcomed with full honors. Most fell somewhere in between, uncertain what to make of this strange risk-seeking species. Finally, the council leader called for the humans themselves to speak. This debate is about your species, she said. Her name was Matriarch Sevlara, and she was from one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Her people, the Erudans, had been spacefaring for over 1 million years. She looked human-like, but her skin was deep blue and her eyes were entirely black. You should have a chance to address these concerns directly. The 4 human students entered the chamber together. Jaewon, Hyunwoo, Minji, and Doyen walked to the speaker's platform. They wore their simple gray uniforms and they looked very small, surrounded by so many different alien species. The crowd quieted, curious to hear what the humans would say. Hyunwoo spoke first. He stood straight and tall, his voice clear and confident. Ambassadors, council members, fellow students, thank you for this opportunity. I know many of you are afraid of us. I understand why. We showed you something disturbing. But I want to ask you a question. Have any of you actually met a human who wanted to die? The chamber was silent. Russian roulette is extreme, Hyunwoo continued. It's a game that very, very few humans actually play. Showing it was like showing you the absolute edge of human behavior. But that edge doesn't define us. What defines us is what we do every day. We live, we learn, we love, we protect what matters to us. Yes, we take risks, but we don't take them because we don't value life. We take them because we value what's on the other side of those risks. Minji stepped forward next. I've been studying galactic history since we arrived here, she said. Every species in this room faced existential risk at some point. War, disease, asteroid impacts, climate disasters, something threatened to wipe you out, and you survived because someone in your species was brave enough to take action, even when that action might fail. She pulled out her data pad and projected statistics into the air. But look at these numbers. When galactic civilization formed, exploration slowed down, discovery slowed down, innovation slowed down. You all became safe, and that's wonderful. I'm not criticizing it. But you also became cautious. In the last 1,000 years, only 3 new technologies have been developed by galactic civilization. 3. In that same period on Earth, humans developed hundreds. Because you take foolish risks, someone shouted from the crowd. Yes, Minji agreed calmly. Some of our risks are foolish. Some of our experiments fail. Some of our explorers die. But some of our risks pay off. Some of our experiments succeed. Some of our explorers come home with discoveries that change everything. That's the trade-off. You've achieved safety, but you've paid for it with stagnation. Doyen spoke next. I'm not saying humans are better than you. We're not. We're younger, less advanced, less wise. But we're different, and that difference might be valuable. Think about it this way. You've built a beautiful, peaceful civilization. You've eliminated most danger. You've created systems that protect your people. This is admirable, but what happens when a new threat emerges? Something you can't predict or prepare for? Who's going to volunteer to face it? He paused, letting the question sink in. Humans will. Not because we want to die, but because we've spent our entire evolutionary history facing new threats. It's what we do. You call it recklessness. We call it adaptability. Finally, Jaewon stepped forward. He was the quietest of the 4, but when he spoke, everyone listened. I want to address the Russian roulette demonstration directly, he said. I know it scared you. It was supposed to. But here's what you need to understand. When I put that gun to my head, I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. I wanted to show you that humans can face death and choose life anyway. He looked around the chamber at all the different species. Every single day, every human alive makes a choice. We choose to keep living even though we know we'll die someday. That's not recklessness. That's the opposite. It's a conscious decision to value life despite its temporary nature. Russian roulette is just a dramatic version of that choice. It's a moment where you face mortality directly and decide that you want to survive. And then you have to wait, helpless, while chance decides your fate. But why? Matriarch Sivlara asked, leaning forward with interest. Why reduce your fate to chance? Because that's reality, Jaewon said softly. All of us are playing Russian roulette every day. We just don't usually see the gun. You could have a heart defect you don't know about. A meteor could hit your ship. A disease could mutate in a way that bypasses your immune system. Death is always random, always lurking. The gun just makes it visible. It forces you to acknowledge what's always true. You're alive right now, but you might not be tomorrow. And the question is, what do you do with that knowledge? The chamber was absolutely silent now. Every being present was thinking about what Jaewon had just said. Humans don't run from that knowledge, Jaewon continued. We accept it. We live with it. And yes, sometimes we play games that make it explicit, because it reminds us that being alive is precious exactly because it can end at any moment. That's not insanity. That's wisdom born from 10,000 generations of humans who lived, struggled, and died to bring us to this moment. Hyunwoo stepped forward again. You ask if humans are safe to integrate into galactic society. Here's my answer. We're as safe as you need us to be. Put us in a hospital, we'll be careful. Put us in a classroom, we'll be respectful. Put us in a ship, we'll follow regulations. But if you need someone to fly into an asteroid field to rescue survivors, if you need someone to test a cure that might be fatal, if you need someone to make first contact with a potentially hostile species, send humans, we'll go. Not because we're suicidal, but because we understand that some things are worth the risk. Minji added, You've built a civilization on caution and calculation. That's kept you safe and stable, but it's also made you vulnerable in a different way. You've forgotten how to act when the math doesn't add up in your favor. Humans never forget that, because our history is full of moments when the math was against us and we succeeded anyway. Sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need people who will try even when success isn't guaranteed. Doyen finished the thought. We're not asking you to become like us. We're not asking you to take risks you're uncomfortable with. We're just asking you to let us be who we are. Let us take the risks you can't take. Let us explore the places you won't explore. Let us ask the questions you're too cautious to ask. And in return, we'll learn from your wisdom, your caution, your careful planning. Together, we might balance each other out." The four humans stood together on the PL. 5 years passed after the Russian roulette demonstration. The Galactic Academy continued its work, training young beings from across the known universe. But things had changed in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. The humans were no longer a curiosity or a controversy. They had become an essential part of how the Academy and the wider galactic community operated. Jaewon stood in the briefing room of the exploration vessel, Star Pioneer. He was older now, lines starting to show around his eyes from years of staring at star charts and making difficult decisions. He wore the uniform of the Galactic Risk Assessment Corps, a division created specifically for humans and the few aliens brave enough to join them. The uniform was dark blue with silver stars on the shoulders, 1 star for every successful high-risk mission completed. Jaewon had 12 stars. Around the table sat the crew for his next mission. They were from 7 different species, and they all volunteered to work with a human risk assessor. The mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. A colony ship carrying 10,000 sleeping colonists had suffered a navigation failure and was drifting toward a neutron star. The radiation was already lethal. Any rescue attempt had a 70% chance of failure. Most species had calculated the odds and decided the colonists were already dead, but humans didn't think that way. "Here's the plan," Jaewon said, projecting a hologram of the neutron star system. "We have a 4-hour window before the radiation becomes unsurvivable, even with our shielding. We jump in, dock with the colony ship, repair their navigation computer, and jump out. The math says we probably die, but probably isn't definitely." A Kethran engineer named Prelvik, whose golden veins pulsed with nervousness, spoke up. "Jaewon, I've worked with humans for 3 years now. I trust your judgment, but 70% failure rate means 7 out of 10 times we die. How do you stay calm knowing that?" Jaewon smiled slightly. "I think about the 30% chance we succeed. I think about 10,000 lives saved. And I remember that someone has to try, so it might as well be us. Also," he added, "I've beaten worse odds." The crew nodded. They had all chosen to work with humans specifically because they wanted to learn this kind of courage. Not recklessness, the humans had learned to be more careful over the years, but the courage to act when action seemed impossible. Across the galaxy, in a medical research facility, Minji worked in a sealed laboratory. She wore a full containment suit as she handled samples of a virus that had appeared on a mining colony. The virus was deadly with a 90% fatality rate. No cure existed. Standard protocol was to quarantine the colony and let the disease burn itself out, accepting that most of the colonists would die. But Minji had volunteered to test an experimental treatment on herself. The treatment had worked in computer simulations and in animal tests, but no one had been brave enough to test it on themselves yet. Aliens calculated the risks and decided it was too dangerous. But Minji had done her own calculations. She had analyzed the data, checked the formulas, and consulted with the best medical minds in the galaxy. Then she had rolled up her sleeve and injected herself with both the virus and the experimental cure. Now she sat in quarantine, her vital signs monitored by a dozen different machines. A team of alien doctors watched through the transparent wall, ready to document either her success or her death. Minji felt the fever rising in her body as the virus took hold. She felt her muscles ache and her head pound. The symptoms were severe, just as predicted. But she also felt the cure working. She could sense her immune system responding in new ways, fighting back against the infection. The numbers on the monitors showed it too. Her antibody levels rising, the virus count dropping. After 2 days of suffering, Minji opened her eyes and smiled at the doctors through the transparent wall. "It works," she said simply. "Start producing it. We can save the colony." The doctors erupted in celebration, but one of them, a Orlasian physician named Kexley, just shook his head in amazement. "You could have died," he said through the communication system. "You knew that when you started." "How do humans do this?" "Someone had to be first," Minji replied. "Might as well be someone who chose it freely instead of someone who had no choice." In another part of the galaxy, Hyunwoo led a first contact team toward an unknown species. The beings called themselves the Karathi, and they had destroyed 3 diplomatic ships that tried to make peaceful contact. Every approach had been met with weapons fire. Standard doctrine said to classify the Karathi as hostile and avoid their space, but Hyunwoo had studied the pattern of attacks. The Karathi only fired on ships that approached from above their planet. Ships approaching from the side or below were ignored. He theorized that above had some cultural or religious significance to the Karathi, and approaching from that direction was seen as an insult or threat. "This is insane," said Zixara, the Vexian communications officer on Hyunwoo's team. "You're betting all our lives on a theory about their culture." "It's an educated guess," Hyunwoo corrected. "I've analyzed their behavior patterns, studied similar situations in Earth's history, and consulted with xenopsychologists. I think I'm right, but you're correct that I could be wrong. That's why I'm asking for volunteers. No one has to come with me." Every member of his team volunteered. They approached the Karathi homeworld from below, moving slowly and broadcasting peaceful intentions in every language they knew. The Karathi ships appeared on their sensors, weapons powered but not firing. Closer, closer, still no weapons fire. Finally, they entered orbit and a Karathi voice came through their communication system. "You show respect," the voice said. "You do not approach from the sky of gods, we will speak with you." The first contact was successful. The Karathi joined the galactic community as trading partners. Hyunwoo returned to the academy as a hero, but he just shrugged when people asked how he knew his theory would work. "I didn't know," he admitted. "I just thought it was worth trying. Better than abandoning an entire species to isolation, because we were too afraid to approach them differently." Doyun, the oldest of the original 4 humans, had become something unexpected. He was now a teacher at the Galactic Academy, but his class wasn't about human culture or risk assessment. It was about courage itself, not just the human version, but the kind of courage that any species could learn. His classroom was always full. Students from dozens of worlds came to hear him speak about facing fear, making difficult decisions, and acting despite uncertainty. He taught using examples from many species, not just humans. He showed them that courage wasn't a uniquely human trait. Humans just expressed it in more obvious and sometimes extreme ways. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Doyun told his current class. "Every being in this room is capable of feeling afraid. Fear is healthy. Fear keeps you alive. But courage is what you do with that fear. Do you let it paralyze you or do you act despite it?" A young Belvonian student, her skin flashing yellow with nervousness, raised a tentacle. "But Professor Doyen, humans seem to seek out fear. You play dangerous games, you take unnecessary risks. That's different from just being brave when you need to be." "You're right," Doyen agreed. "Some humans do seek out fear because our brains evolved in dangerous environments. We're wired to expect threats. When there are no threats, some of us feel restless. We create artificial challenges to satisfy that need. But that's not what I'm teaching you. I'm teaching you that when real challenges arise, when genuine risks appear, you can face them. You don't have to seek danger, but you also don't have to run from it." He pulled up a hologram showing various species performing acts of courage. A Grellian pulling a colleague from a damaged ship, despite the risk of exposure to vacuum. A Catherine speaking truth to a corrupt leader despite the risk to her career. A Vortian parent running into a burning building to save their child despite their species' natural fear of fire. "See?" Doyen said. "Courage is universal. Humans just made it more visible because we sometimes take it to extremes. But all of you have this capacity. The question is whether you'll use it when the time comes." Years passed. The 4 humans who had demonstrated Russian roulette that day became legends in their own ways. They had proven that humanity could be integrated into galactic civilization without disaster. More importantly, they had shown that human risk-taking, when properly channeled, could be an asset rather than a liability. The Galactic Risk Assessment Corps grew. Hundreds of humans joined along with aliens from species that had learned to appreciate calculated courage. They took on the missions that no one else would accept. They tested the technologies that no one else would try. They made first contact with species that no one else would approach. Their casualty rate was higher than any other branch of galactic service, but their success rate was also higher. And in the Academy Museum, in a special exhibit about humanity's integration into galactic society, sat a wooden box with a revolver inside. The gun had never been loaded again after that demonstration 5 years ago. Next to it was a plaque with a simple inscription, "Russian Roulette," a human game where life and death are decided by chance. demonstrated by Jaewon, Hyunwoo, Minji, and Doyoon, to show the Galactic Academy humanity's unique relationship with risk and mortality.